This BBC podcast is supported by ads outside the UK.
We got a call from the bank and said, "Are you aware that there's no funds in this account?"
A string of victims across the US, stretching from coast to coast.
The amount of victims in such a short time was unbelievable.
Real people losing real money, but the criminals are ghosts.
The anger, the frustration, the fear.
From the BBC World Service, this is Evil Core.
The story of a cybercrime case that stretches from small-town America to the backstreets of Moscow.
Listen now. Search for Cyberhack wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hello, this is The History Hour with Max Pearson. This week's guests on Witness History who've shed light on events from the past with their first-hand testimonies. This week, a remarkable account of the surrender of Japan to China at the end of the Second World War.
And they came forward, and through this terrific crowd, enormous crowd of people there, hundreds of thousands, and they marched through this enormous corridor.
Plus, the battle between the VHS and Betamax video formats, how the Indian rupee got its symbol, and the economist who gave the world the acronym BRICS.
By complete fluke, I then realised that if I played around with the first letter of each of the four, it came out as BRIC.
That's all coming up later. But first, a moment from the last century when a natural disaster caused the mass evacuation of an island's entire population. Rachel Naylor uses archived recordings to tell the story.
Tristan da Cunha, farther from the nearest populated land than any other island in the world. 1,500 miles of Atlantic Ocean separated from the Cape of Good Hope, and 1,200 from St. Helena.
It's the 8th of October 1961, and we're on the remote island of Tristan da Cunha, a British overseas territory nearly 3,000 kilometres from the nearest mainland, South Africa's west coast. There's been a large earthquake and a landslide. Those on the eastern side of the island, like Mary Swain, who was speaking to the BBC in 1961, are being advised by Administrator Peter Wheeler to stay with friends or family in the west.
Gosh, it was terrible. My son came and he said, "Mother, you must come to the west line." He said, because Mr. Wheeler said no one is to be to the east line. Nonsense, I'm not leaving my home. I said, I'm going to bed. So he said, "No, Mother, you mustn't. You must come and stay with me for the night." So all night through we hear boulders and boulders coming down. I thought half of the mountain was coming. In the morning I say to my son Willie, "Mother's going down, cook up breakfast at her own house and my lunch." He said, "You best not, you're disobeying orders." "Oh, I can't help it," I said. "Rather than be in my own house, I was used to quietness."
Reluctantly, Mary listened to her son Willie and went back to bed at his house to try and get some more rest.
He came into the bedroom, he said, "Mum, you best get up." I said, "Why, sonny?" He said, "Mum, you best get up," he said, "the earth is opening." "Oh, God," I say, "No, my boy."
But Willie was right. A fissure, or crack, had opened between the settlement, the only inhabited part of the island, and the crawfish canning factory, and the ground had started to rise. Mary went home to where her husband had stayed.
"Fred," I say, "Fred, jump up quick," I say, "the earth is opening." I said, "Jump up quick, the earth is opening." So he jumped out of bed and rushed to where we keep potatoes and got up his trade bag and came in. When he came in, I was stuffing a whole lot of rubbish, as I thought, into this sack and saying to myself, "This is nonsense. Taking all this stuff with me," I said, "I just might as well leave it because I can't carry it."
At a hastily organised island meeting,
immediate evacuation was ordered to the potato patches Monday, October the 9th.
I just buy a pair of shoes out of the canteen for my husband for a Christmas present. When I got so far up on the grass, to my astonishment, I had the box and not the shoes. The shoes was dropped out on the grass. So, gosh, I said, now what I have to do? I got to rush back and get those shoes. I can't help it. My life for the shoes.
With the help of her grandsons, a tired and flustered Mary went back to her house again to gather some more of her belongings, this time focusing on her 3 essentials.
I had a rifle, a big overcoat, and a lamp. I had another sack with some clothes in. I couldn't do that. I had to give that to a boy to took for me. I got so far, I was so exhausted, I had to lay on the grass again. Freddie was much tired than where I was, so he couldn't do no more. Then I had to get a torch and show them along the road. And it was just puddles and ponds and raining and cold and wet. When we got to the hut about the potato patches, we all cuddled together like sardines in a tin. Cold, miserable, no drink, no supper, no nothing.
But if Mary thought that was bad, things were about to get a lot worse. The next morning, the rising ground had become a volcano.
Oh gosh, I said, now what's happening? So my neighbor was sitting outside me, said to me, we are going home. Home, I say, not for me. I said, didn't you heard what Mr. Wheeler said? She said, no. I said, it's a volcano, my dear. We can't go home. We got to look out for our lives.
At this very moment, molten lava is flowing over this land. Rocks are being flung hundreds of feet into the air, and black smoke is covering the island with choking fumes. The whole place is vibrating with earthquakes, and the eastern corner is cracking and breaking up.
All 264 islanders, alongside some chickens and donkeys, were evacuated on the fishing boats Tristania and Francis Repetto to Nightingale Island, 39 kilometres southwest, to shelter overnight. The following day, the 11th of October, the Dutch ship Tristan picked up the marooned islanders for the 5-day journey to Cape Town in South Africa. From there, they boarded the mail ship Stirling Castle, arriving in Southampton on England's south coast on the 3rd of November.
Britain greeted her shyest citizens with a flattering but unwelcome battery of popping flashbulbs, television cameras, and as a special treat from the Daily Sketch, a life-size replica of Yogi Bear. The refugees were possibly gratified and definitely confused.
The islanders were initially put up in temporary military accommodation in Pendle Camp in Surrey.
Here they had their first direct contact with organised crime, the powers of the police and the majesty of the law, of pre-packed and pasteurised food, and the dangers of crossing the road.
They were later moved to the former RAF flying boats base at Cowshot, a village in Hampshire on the shores of Southampton Water.
Tristanians have very good manners, and it's useless to ask if they're enjoying England, partly because they don't know yet.
Oh, well, I like it very well indeed. I enjoy my food, and I enjoyed seeing the people, and they're very nice and all that, so I can't expect to have everything all at once.
And, of course, it's not so amusing for them as for us to read that their accent is odd, and that they spend so much of their time gasping at such things as railway trains and nylon stockings. Some reporters are luckier than others. I was unable to record any gasping.
On Tristan, money didn't matter much till the Royal Navy arrived there in 1942. For 150 years, life depended on the sea, on the potato patches, and on the cattle, donkeys, and sheep. Life was very simple and very hard.
When we had no money, we lived off fish, meat, potatoes, birds, and all that. Everybody happy. We knit clothes. We did all sorts of things. But when the company came, you see, then was money. And those who could work, well, they got more wages. And those who couldn't work, well, they just a bit of bad luck. But all the same, I rather have my days back when I was young, say when I was 20 and 16.
The following year, in early 1962, a Royal Society expedition returned to Tristan to inspect the volcano's impact.
The scientists who went there found that the eruption had ended, that Tristan had changed, but at least it was still there, and so were the homes. The lava which had engulfed the canning factory had miraculously turned at the last moment and run into the sea. Some of the animals were still alive. Though the dogs had run wild and slaughtered the sheep, the cows seemed quite content with their newfound independence. And with no one to steal their eggs, the hens had gone forth and multiplied.
On the 8th of September, 12 islanders returned to Tristan to attempt to make it habitable again. The British Colonial Office arranged a ballot in December, and the community voted 148-5 in favour of returning. An advance party left Tilbury, a port in Essex, on the 17th of March 1963, arriving on Tristan on the 9th of April.
A party of 63, homeward bound for Tristan da Cunha. They're the first body of islanders who have decided to go back. To go back was a big decision, but only a handful voted to remain in England.
The remaining Tristanians returned on the 10th of November.
The islanders have learned a lot from their year in Britain, and now they've made their choice. They've decided to go back to a remote volcanic rock in the middle of the Atlantic.
The street in Cowshot where they were housed is still called Tristan Close. Today, Tristan is home to more than 200 British citizens. Mary Swain was speaking to the BBC's Renee Cutforth in 1961. After returning to the island with her husband Fred and their 7 children, she died in 1974.
In 1961, when a volcano came.
I'll give the last word to Tristanian Gerald Repetto, who wrote this song, There's No Place Like Home, about his experience.
First was the voyage across the sea.
The story of the 1961 eruption and evacuation of Tristan da Cunha was brought to us by Rachel Naylor. The island has always been a unique sort of place and only populated since the 19th century. Well, Anne Green is a retired teacher from the island of Tristan da Cunha and is with us now from the island. So, first of all, where were you in 1961 when the eruption happened?
I was in the Falkland Islands with my parents. My father was employed there on a sheep farm at Port Louis, and I was 9 years old at the time. We went back to Tristan when the main party of islanders returned in November 63.
What was the resettlement like?
The resettlement was difficult for the first few years, people having to start all over again. For example, the potato harvest failed. Many items were in short supply or ran out entirely in the shop, especially essential items like tea, sugar and flour. All the sheep had gone, so some sheep were brought in from the Falkland Islands. Also poultry were brought in, as those had all disappeared. One family returned and, finding their home destroyed by the volcano, decided to return to England on the ship that brought the islanders back.
But those who stayed, why? I mean, why? What is the appeal of living in such a remote and isolated place, especially given the difficulties that were presented by what had happened after the volcanic eruption?
Well, I think a lot of people found that they had the freedom to do and live as they wanted to live. Of course, the decision to come back was a decision made by the older people. I'm not sure that some of the very younger people wanted to come back entirely. But, living on Tristan gives you a certain amount of freedom. You know, you don't have to bother about your children wandering around the island, that they're going to be unsafe in any way. And I think that appealed to a lot of people.
But it's a hard life.
Yes, it can be difficult. People have to work hard to sustain their life. People here work at various government departments, and also they have to farm as well. So it's not an easy life, but it's one that a lot of people feel is what they want to do.
And let's go back to when the island was first settled, because we're going right back to the early 19th century. Just to give us a little thumbnail history of how that came about.
Well, Tristan was on the maritime route from Europe to the East Indies in the 17th and 18th centuries, and many ships passed by then. However, because there was no real safe harbour, they found that it wasn't a good idea to have a settlement on Tristan. But the beginning of the present settlement really began with the British garrison sent from the Cape in 1816 to prevent Tristan being used as a base by the French to rescue Napoleon, who was imprisoned on St. Helena. When the garrison withdrew, one of the members, Corporal William Glass, who was a Scot, with his South African wife and 2 children, along with 2 others who were stonemasons from Devon, decided to stay, and so began the present settlement.
The island played a fairly significant part in the Second World War.
Yes. During the Second World War, Tristan was used as a radio and weather station. It was known as HMS Atlantic Isle. Several naval personnel were stationed here, and a group of islands were also trained as the Tristan Defence Volunteers, a bit like the Home Guard. Many new buildings were constructed during the time that they were here, including a school, a hospital, and a store. That was for the first time that these things were available on the island. Islanders were employed and paid wages for the first time. And the naval chaplain, the Reverend Lawrence, was instrumental in interesting a South African company to begin fishing commercially for lobster. That company later built a canning factory, which provided employment for the island community.
And it is still a really very small population on the island. Is it a place where pretty much everyone knows everyone and everyone knows everyone else's business?
Well, yes, everyone knows everyone. You know, with a population of 230-something people, you know all your neighbours.
That's Anne Green, a retired teacher, speaking to us from the island of Tristan da Cunha. Next, we've got an extraordinarily up-close and personal story from a key event in the Second World War. This was the moment when Japan surrendered to China at the end of 8 years of brutal occupation. It was an emotionally charged event. The occupation had been characterised by atrocities and famine in which millions of people died. John Stanfield, who's now 105, represented the British Army in the surrender ceremony. Here's Josephine McDermott.
It's 1945. Thousands of people are packed into a courtyard in the Forbidden City, the Imperial Palace complex in the heart of Beijing, then known as Peking. There's a line of Japanese generals standing in front of a building with a deep crimson pagoda roof, the Hall of Supreme Harmony. Before them is a table with surrender documents bound in yellow silk for the generals and representatives of the Allies. Putting pen to paper will bring an end to Japanese occupation. John Stanfield, a 24-year-old major, has arrived for the ceremony. But what he doesn't know is that he will have a history-making role. When did you know that you were going to be signing on behalf of the British?
Oh, about half an hour before.
Were you surprised?
Well, I knew there's nobody else. Somebody had to do it.
How did that somebody come to be John? His story starts in 1941, when he joined the British military corps that sets up ways to communicate in combat.
I was called up in my age group when I was 20 and was finally commissioned into the Royal Signals. Then we went to India. Our unit was linked to the GHQ in Delhi, General Headquarters. I saw the right man and found myself appointed to China in the SOE, Special Operations Executive. I was posted to China as second in command of China Signals.
In 1936, Japan had become allies of Nazi Germany. A year later, it went to war with China, capturing Shanghai, Nanjing, and Beijing.
Worse even than a military defeat, the most serious blow to China's moral prestige is the occupation of her ancient capital by Japan's armies.
The Japanese had control of all the coast of China. It had also captured Burma Road.
British and Chinese are working in close liaison with each other in the vital struggle to stem the savage Japanese thrusts.
By the end of July 1945, the Second World War in Europe was over. An Allied invasion of Japan was imminent. Together with the United Kingdom and China, the United States called for the unconditional surrender of the Japanese armed forces in the Potsdam Declaration. The alternative was described as prompt and utter destruction, which then followed with the use of an atomic bomb over Hiroshima on the 6th of August.
Scientists, British and American, have made the atomic bomb at last. The first one was dropped on a Japanese city this morning. It was designed for a detonation equal to 20,000 tons of high explosives.
3 days later, another bomb was dropped over Nagasaki. It's estimated a total of 214,000 people were killed in both strikes. The official US justification for the dropping of the 2 atomic bombs was to force the Japanese government to surrender, which it did on the 14th of August 1945.
We were having a feast in our compound, and all the bigwigs were there, generals with General Ho, and a lot of noise going on outside. So General Ho said to the little boy, "Go outside, find out what's the trouble." And he came back with a sheaf of these little pages which said the Japanese had surrendered. The bombs dropped and everything stopped. But it stopped all fighting. Oh, everybody was very surprised. We were out of a job.
In this united newsreel, US President Harry Truman announces a message received from the Japanese government.
I deem this reply a full acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration, which specifies the unconditional surrender of Japan. General Douglas MacArthur has been appointed the Supreme Allied Commander to receive the Japanese surrender. Great Britain, Russia, and China will be represented by high-ranking officers.
The first and most significant surrender ceremony took place on the 2nd of September in Tokyo Bay on board the USS Missouri.
History is in the making at Yokosuka Naval Base as General MacArthur arrives to board a waiting destroyer.
one of 3 which took surrender parties to the battleship in the harbour. A few minutes later, a dark grey motorboat brought the Japanese envoys. Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu, head of the delegation, hobbles on a wooden leg, result of an Allied air attack on Shanghai. Shigemitsu, in top hat, yellow gloves and morning coat, is first to swallow the bitter pill of unconditional surrender.
Let us pray that peace be now restored to the world and that God will preserve it always.
After this, there were 5 designated surrender regions in the Japanese Empire where the field armies of Japan laid down their weapons. One of them was China, and there were high expectations.
They were going to have a really good, proper do. I mean, after all, they'd been under Japanese now for about 7 or 8 years. They were going to have a proper surrender in the Forbidden City. That's the centre of China, always has been for centuries.
John, who was in Xi'an establishing wireless stations, would travel 600 miles to Beijing with 2 other British servicemen for the ceremony.
We went in a plane to Peking and met by Chinese generals, all in their best swords and everything. And I was pretty well in rags. I came in my summer uniform.
The 10th of October was chosen for the date of surrender in the Forbidden City.
It's the biggest royal palace in the world. And that means that lots and lots and lots of buildings, and all in wonderful colours. This is the centre of China. And for hundreds of years, the emperors have always come to record their victories in that area. In front of the Grand Coronation Palace, those 4 flags, China, of course, Britain, United States, and Russia. Once they all settled down, the general in charge called the Japanese representative to come forward, you see. And they came forward, and through this terrific crowd, enormous crowd of people there, hundreds of thousands, I think, and they marched through this enormous corridor, and they, first of all, had to surrender their swords, and that's a very big thing, actually. They surrender their honour. It's a magnificent sight, wonderful sight.
What were the swords like?
Very nice, long, curved swords. Of course, I was offered one. But I wasn't going to carry a actually sword around with me all the time. They'd be quite valuable now, I suppose.
The Chinese war commander, General Sun Lianzhong, received the surrender, and then it was time for the declaration to be signed. John had been serving under a Chinese general of military intelligence, Major General Ho Kan-zong, but as a major in the Royal Signals, he found himself to be the most senior British representative there, and so the duty fell to him to sign for the British.
General Ho, my general, escorted me to sign the surrender documents, 4 sets of them, and all a bit of a scrum, but I signed.
What did it feel like?
Well, magnificent sunshine, lovely place, beautifully decorated, but a lot of noise when the Japanese were called forward. I mean, after all, they'd been bosses for 7 or 8 years, and now they're going to be humiliated, giving up all their swords. It's impossible to realise the enormity of that. It's very moving in a way, yes.
After the Japanese occupation, there were 4 years of civil war before China became the People's Republic under Communist leader Mao Zedong. John Stanfield is the only British person alive today who was there at that surrender in Beijing.
Josephine McDermott spoke to John Stanfield in 2023. John's amazing story has been added to our collection of Second World War first-hand memories on the website. Go to bbc.com/witnesshistory. Still to come, the designer who gave India a symbol for the rupee and the competitors in the fight between Betamax and VHS.
His Betamax system had a good reputation technically, but was soon outstripped by the more widely available VHS rival.
And I can truthfully say home video changed my life.
But first, the origin of an acronym which has slipped into common usage around the world. Just about 25 years ago, the economist Jim O'Neill was working at a bank in New York when he wrote a report about which countries might become big players in the world economy. He's been speaking to Megan Jones.
Let me ask you a question. Do you know what Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa all have in common? Well, they're now part of a group of countries often referred to as...
BRICS.
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 BRICS. You know, they have BRICS.
As you just heard, the acronyms even caught the attention of US President Donald Trump. But what started as a term for emerging economies has evolved into a group of major world powers. And to understand how it all began, let me take you back to the early 2000s.
The euro, once a dream for the architects of European Union, today became reality.
The Millennium Bug had been dominating thought. Much money had gone into stopping it damaging the financial system.
Well, manufacturing is in recession right across the globe, in the United States, the United Kingdom, in Europe and in Japan. There's no doubt about that.
Keeping an eye on all that is economist Jim O'Neill, who, in November 2001, is sitting in his office at Goldman Sachs Investment Bank, which overlooks Fleet Street in central London. He's drinking his morning cup of tea.
English breakfast with milk, no sugar.
And thinking about how the global economy could change.
So I thought, well, let's see if I can try and think of something that can help the firm and its clients think about the world differently.
It's an idea he'd been thinking of since September, when he was invited to speak at a business conference at the World Trade Center in New York.
I decided to leave the day before the attack, and I will never forget that I'd swapped business cards with a number of people that wanted my slides for my presentation. Amongst the many things I thought about in the hours after that event was what had happened to these people whose business cards I'd just got.
Now, one of the main consequences of September the 11th was a further weakening of the global economy. Governments around the Western world have been trying to boost consumer confidence to avoid plunging further into recession.
Back in London, Jim's writing a report reflecting on America's influence on the world and which other countries were going to reshape the economy. He picks up his pen and starts scribbling away.
I started to play around with the size of China's economy, which at the time was just about $1 trillion, and to see what might happen if they continued to grow at the same kind of rates.
So that's China.
At that time, the mood about Russia, as demonstrated by the fact it had been invited to be part of the expanded G7 to become the G8, was a place where Western business people and Western political leaders were very excited about.
Russia joins China.
Coinciding with all of this was the growth of what was left of the technology world after the issues involving the financial challenges of the tech sector. Crucially, India becoming a bigger sort of offshoring centre and playing its own role in the global economy in a way that it hadn't even been thought of before.
That's China, Russia and India.
When I looked at each of the three of those and considered different paths of how they might grow over the subsequent decade, I realised very quickly that they'd become a more significant share of global GDP.
This is gross domestic product, which is the most common measure for the size of an economy.
But then I thought, well, I've got sort of Europe and Asia. Who is there, if anybody, in Latin America that I could think of as being the same kind of importance? Maybe Brazil might be an interesting part of this story.
China, Russia, India, and now Brazil.
By complete fluke, I then realised that if I played around with the first letter of each of the four, it came out as BRIC. I inherently was thinking that if you wanted to be able to manage these kind of potentially global consequential issues better, you needed to have these countries as part of the central part of global policy making.
Jim puts his pen down. His report is finished. And then it's published with the title
Building Better Economic BRICS.
Then not much happened.
What is one of the amusing aspects of the BRICS story is that for quite a while, nobody really paid a lot of attention to it. I would think to myself, well, maybe I haven't really influenced anybody.
After a while, Jim's concept began to get recognition.
The head of the IKEA family at the time, he'd written a letter saying how this was such an influential paper that it was going to have a major influence on how IKEA thought about its strategy.
Although not everyone agreed with his choice of countries.
I remember having specific discussions with Mexican policymakers. The Indonesians certainly would ask and say, what about us? Various African countries and African journalists would often say, why is it not BRICA?
With so much debate about who was in and who was left out, Jim wrote another paper in 2005 where he identified what he called the Next 11, looking at which other countries had potential. The list ranged from Mexico, Turkey, Iran,
Egypt, Nigeria, of course, South Korea,
the Philippines, Vietnam,
Indonesia, Bangladesh, Pakistan.
I mean, there's not really an acronym that rolls off your tongue for those ones, though, is there?
It's stuck as the Next 11. I sometimes joke that the reason why we limited it to 11 was again because of my love of football.
I'll briefly interrupt here to mention Jim's love for the English football club Manchester United.
In hindsight, we made an error because one of the 11 should have been Ethiopia. I ended up saying soon after that Ethiopia were like the Ole Gunnar Solskjaer of Manchester United, in that he was this famous substitute at the time who would always come onto the pitch and score goals and be a crucial part of Manchester United.
While Jim was exploring the Next 11, the BRIC nations were giving his concept a new life, organising their first official summit.
I mean, I was so flattered, but I couldn't resist equally as quickly saying, they can't do that without asking me, it's my idea.
On the 16th of June 2009, the leaders of Brazil, India and China met in Yekaterinburg in Russia.
I was extremely fascinated as to what they would say. And I had all these sort of lofty expectations as to how they would perpetuate and promote some of the underlying ideas that we touched on.
It was hosted by Russia's then-president, Dmitry Medvedev, who you'll hear in this clip from BBC News.
Самое главное, мы это обсуждали под практическим углом.
The most important fact is that we discussed it in a very practical way. We want to make the decision-making process on the world's political and economic issues more fair.
A year later, South Africa joined, adding an S to BRIC. But you'll remember it wasn't one of the original 4 countries. Since then, the group has continued to expand and is currently made up of 11 countries.
The annual get-together of the BRICS countries and the statement they put out is just this welcome reminder that world governance has just not shifted to deal with this much more complex world. The contradictory part comes about because they don't really do much other than this very powerful symbolic stuff.
Jim O'Neill left Goldman Sachs in 2013. 2 years later, he was appointed to the UK's House of Lords, becoming Lord O'Neill of Gatley. He continues to follow Manchester United and keep a keen eye on BRICS.
I don't travel anything like as much to these places as I once did, but I do still do it. And when I go, I'm certainly treated as a bit of a celebrity and often like a bit of a pop star. I was in Delhi, and after I finished giving a keynote speech, I came off the stage and I must have had about 60 people wanting my autograph and selfies. So it was quite amusing and kind of a bit weird.
The economist Jim O'Neill was speaking to Megan Jones. For literally centuries, there had been accepted symbols for the pound sterling, the US dollar, and then more recently the euro and the yen. But what about the Indian currency, the rupee? Surya Alango has been speaking to Udaya Kumar Dharmalingam, who in 2010 designed the Indian rupee symbol.
On the 15th July 2010, it was directly announced in the national media.
The rupee today joined the ranks of the dollar, pound, euro and yen. It now has...
That's how it was reported by New Delhi Television Limited, known as NDTV, a prominent Indian news network.
The then broadcasting minister, Mrs. Ambika Soni, she announced, she took my design and then she announced to the public that this is going to be used as the rupee symbol.
The symbol will standardize the expression for Indian rupee in different languages, both within and outside the country.
When this announcement is made, the designer behind the new currency symbol, Udaya Kumar Dharmalingam, is busy planning a move across the country to start his first teaching job. So he has no idea what's just happened, and that he's about to be bombarded by the paparazzi.
Suddenly I just got a lot of calls, and then there were like media who just came into the hostel. I was just puzzled then. Then somebody told me that, no, your design has been announced on the television, and that's how I got to know about it.
Outside of his hostel, a growing crowd of onlookers, students and staff start gathering.
The road were blocked and a lot of things, and so many vans were there. They were all like cameras everywhere. They were all setting up in different places.
Uday Kumar's phone did not stop ringing.
Continuously for 3 days, I should say. There were a lot more from other parts of the country. I also started to kind of call up. I hardly got to speak to my own family. So, in fact, then I was using this small mobile phone at the time. My friends helped me to keep changing the batteries all the time, charging, changing.
The media attention was so big.
I had to delay my joining date, but the process and the entire thing itself was very much memorable and cherishable.
So how did we get here? Let's go back 18 months.
The government of India announced a competition. I was actually doing my PhD at Industrial Design Center, Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. And I was writing my thesis and completing it. And that's when I got to hear about this competition. And I was very keen to participate. That's how it's all actually started.
The Indian government had some guidelines for the competition.
They said the symbol should reflect our Indian culture and traditional ethos. So that was one of the key focus point for me. And I tried to kind of develop an idea around that. Yeah? So how do I bring the Indian culture and tradition into this tiny symbol and that reflects our country?
After 2.5 months of research and sketching,
one of the idea was I used the form of letter R, which is the basis for Ru, which can expand to Rupiah. And I also tried to blend the Latin scripts along with the Devanagari script, where you can also see that there is a capital letter R without the vertical stroke. So the R also expands to rupees. So Rupiah and rupees both denote the Indian currency. So that was the fundamental basic philosophy of the design. And from there, I went on to embed a lot more meanings into the design.
Uday Kumar wanted the symbol to be globally recognized.
So if you look at many of the currency symbols across the world, so they have this visual grammar, where you have a line which kind of cuts across the letter either vertically, horizontally, or diagonally. So I wanted to follow the same visual grammar to kind of establish the semantics of what a visual currency should look like.
He also wanted to capture the character of India.
India is vast and very diverse in terms of the regions, in terms of the climate, in terms of the geography, in terms of the language, in terms of traditions, rituals, practices, community. So if you take every aspect of life, it's quite different in different parts of the country, right? But it is this diversity that brings us together and creates what we call India. So in that sense, then how do I kind of come up with an identity which will reflect everybody and which will represent a common Indian? So I thought probably the flag is one thing which has no bias or it does not particular or specify to any particular community or a section or a region. So then that was the concept, right? Integrate the tricolor flag as a part of the symbol, where you can see this top line and also the middle line. In between, you have this white space to denote Indian currency and to denote every individual of this country.
Uday Kumar was one of more than 3,000 people who entered. For months, he didn't hear a thing.
Suddenly, in the month of November 2009, I received a letter from the government of India stating that I have been chosen as one of the 5 finalists for the rupee symbol design competition. And we were invited to New Delhi in the Reserve Bank of India quarters. And then we were asked to make a 10-minute presentation in front of a 7-member jury. And so that was slated for December 5th. So then I had to travel there. Then I made my presentation.
When Uday Kumar got there, he found the 4 other finalists all waiting to present their design.
My turn was in 3rd or 4th. The first person went and it was more than 45 minutes. She did not come back. And then the next person went. So almost everybody took above 45 minutes. I was the only guy who kind of came back in 15 minutes. So I was just very nervous and wondering either they understood or they did not understand. So I was kind of a little nervous and very much worried and concerned. But yeah, it worked out for us.
Afterwards, the panel invited the finalists to come together.
And we were very curious what is going to happen next. And that's when the chairman of the committee said, we are only a recommending committee. We would be ranking your entries from 1 to 5. And then this will be shared with the parliament. And there they will discuss on it. And then it will move to the cabinet ministry. And then they will also kind of discuss on it. And then finally it goes to the prime minister and the finance minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, and then Pa Chidambaram. I'm sure he was the finance minister then. So they would get to choose the final design. And then you will know who has won it.
So the pressure was on.
Yes. Yes, yeah, really. Yeah, I was nervous.
After 7 months, still no word. By now, Udaya Kumar had completed his PhD. He'd been hired as an assistant professor at the Department of Design at the Indian Institute of Technology in Guwahati. But then, the day before he was due to start, the news came that he had won the competition, and he was besieged by journalists, including reporters from NDTV.
A new rupee that has catapulted the young creator of this symbol to a new high.
It's a great honor to be part of the Indian history.
Yeah, I think immediately they wanted to kind of start to implement it. And after probably later on, the coins had the symbols. They were the newly minted coins then. In 2011, I think there were some new coins were introduced. And then the symbols was part of the coins. And then the currencies came, the currency notes. They also had the symbol. And of course, in various other places also, they started to make use of it in all the correspondence and communications. And everywhere it was made use.
A few months later, riding on the high of designing the new identity of the Indian currency, Udaya Kumar visited a Hindu temple with some friends.
One of my friends regularly visits that temple, and he happened to introduce me to the priest, stating that this is the person who designed the rupee symbol, and he's very well known and popular and things like that. And he was expecting that the priest will congratulate me and appreciate my design. But he just looked at me and stared at me and said that, what is the big deal about it? Anybody can do this design. There's nothing new about it. And my friend's face went a little sad, but I was really happy. Yeah, so because that was the whole intention, right? So we want to design something which is for the common public, and if they can understand and relate and see that it belongs to them, and that's, I believe, is the success of the design.
Dr. Udaya Kumar Dharmalingam is now a professor at the Department of Design at the Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati. He was speaking to Surya Elango. Next, we've got this week's sporting witness. In 1988, the American diver, Greg Louganis, hit his head on the diving board at the Seoul Olympic Games in South Korea. At the time, only he and his coach, Ron O'Brien, knew he was HIV positive. They had to decide whether to tell officials about the possible health risk, as Greg described in a conversation with Peter Bowes in 2012.
The first feeling that I had was, I was like totally embarrassed, because this is supposed to be the Olympics, and you're supposed to be pretty good, and you're not supposed to do stupid stuff like that. So I was trying to figure out, okay, now how do I get out of this pool without anybody seeing me? I got up out of the water, and then I didn't know how bad it was.
How painful was it?
Well, there's so much adrenaline. I couldn't tell you. I was just trying to deal with the situation. Head trauma like that, it doesn't bleed right away. You get the gash, and then it wasn't until I crossed the 3 meters in the platform going towards the hot tub, and I met my coach, Ron O'Brien, then that's when he noticed the blood trickling down my hairline.
Greg Louganis, already an Olympic gold medal winner, was helped away from the poolside. What only he and his coach, Ron O'Brien, knew was that his blood, trickling from the head wound, carried a risk. Greg was HIV positive.
Dr. James Puffer, he met us, and we went to this little side room, took a look at it, cleaned it up, and sewed it up.
In those seconds after you hit your head, you said your first thought was of embarrassment. This shouldn't happen to a professional diver in this way. Mm-hmm. How quickly did you then think HIV?
It was pretty quick. When I realized that I was bleeding, I was terrified. I didn't know what my responsibility was, but I knew where I was, and I knew that it would be an issue, a huge issue, and I probably wouldn't have been able to continue.
What sort of scenarios were going through your mind? Were you thinking of the potential that other divers could be infected, what people would say?
I was concerned about that, but you're not going to get HIV through in a chlorinated pool.
But did you realize that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I wasn't putting... The only one that I was putting at danger, at risk, was the doctor. He had direct contact with the blood, and It was funny because my coach shook his hand, thanking him profusely, and as he's shaking his hand, he's checking his hands to make sure that there's no abrasions.
So how could you not tell the doctor?
You know, it's in the heat of a competition. And like I said, I was paralyzed by fear. I didn't know what my responsibility was. So, you know, in those situations, we don't always make the most rash decisions and choices. So, you know, I was terrified. I didn't know if I was going to be continuing. Those were decisions that I had to make in a very short time.
And I know it's easy to say, and this word hindsight keeps coming up, but in that situation again, do you think you could rationalise it better and you might have been more open with people at the time?
No, not in the time. I mean, at that time, as far as a lot of people were concerned, it was HIV and AIDS was killing the right people. You know, it was homosexuals, IV drug users, and prostitutes. A few years earlier, they didn't have a name for it. You know, it was the gay cancer.
Greg Louganis is gay, but he didn't come out publicly until the 1990s. He says when he was first diagnosed HIV positive 6 months before the Olympics, he thought he should just give up diving and, as he puts it, go home and wait to die. But his cousin, a doctor, had persuaded him that continuing to train was probably the healthiest thing for him, and he was immediately prescribed antiretroviral drugs.
The way that they prescribed it at that time, it was 2 pills every 4 hours around the clock. So you're training for the Olympics, Olympic trials, Olympics, and every 4 hours you're reminded you have a compromised immune system. You know, in the middle of the night I had to wake up and take my AZT. In the middle of the morning I had to wake up and take my AZT.
Despite the drugs, despite the stress, Greg Louganis had managed to make it to his third Olympic Games, and he wasn't about to give up because of an injury.
My coach, he said, you know, you have a wonderful career to look back on. He said, you don't have to dive. You don't have to get back up on that board. You've accomplished more than any other diver, and you have a tremendous career to look back on. And my response to him was, because I was paralyzed by fear, I didn't know what to do. And my response to him was, you know, we worked too long and hard to get here, and I didn't want to give up without a fight. And he said, okay, fine. You know, we got to get ready for the next dive. We went for a walk. We joked, you know, that hockey players get 30 stitches and they go back in the game. They lose teeth and they go back in the game. And this is just a flesh wound, you know. And I mean, we were just, you know, kind of joking about it. But ultimately, it was a fluke, and I had to move on. It was almost like a mixed blessing. Yeah, it was horrible that happened, but it was kind of a wake-up call for myself and Ron O'Brien. I was the favorite going into that competition, and in that split second, I became the underdog. And it's human nature to root for the underdog.
With the crowd behind him, Greg Louganis' next dive earned him the highest score in the entire competition. He went on to win 2 gold medals in those Seoul Olympics. But it wasn't until 1994, just before he published his autobiography, that he finally told the doctor who treated him about his HIV status.
Dr. Puffer, I have known him for years. I knew his family. I saw his kids grow up. He was a family practitioner. And I figured as a doctor that you are tested regularly for HIV. So before the book came out, I called him and I told him, I said, about my HIV status. And I said, now I'm assuming that you've been tested for HIV. And he said no. And I was devastated because I knew his wife, I knew his family. I cared about, you know, all of them. I felt so much guilt. When he sewed my head up, there were no latex gloves on the pool deck. You know, and he reassured me. He said, you know, I took every precaution, whether you were HIV positive or not. He got tested, and then a week later he gave me a call, and he told me that he was HIV negative. Yeah, he lost some sleep. He admitted that. He said, I lost some sleep over it, but once he got the results back, and he breathed a lot easier.
After retiring from competitive diving, Greg Louganis built a new life as a motivational speaker, actor and dog trainer. But he accepts that no matter what he does, he'll always be remembered for that September day in Seoul.
When that happened, I told my coach, I said, that's all anybody's going to remember. Me hitting my head on the board in the Olympics. Fortunately, I came back and I was successful. At least they have some good stuff beyond me just hitting my head on the board. That you can come back, that that it is about picking yourself up. It's not about the falling down, it's about picking yourself up.
The American diver Greg Louganis was speaking to Peter Bowes. Finally this week, a key moment in the history of home entertainment. For more than a decade, VHS and Betamax battled over which video recorder would dominate. By 1988, the eventual champion had been decided. Johnny Ianson has the story.
It was a very bloody, ugly, difficult war.
So despite producing what some people consider a far superior quality picture, can Betamax survive?
They believed they alone, Sony, had such a big, important name, they would be able to make Betamax succeed. And they were wrong.
His Betamax system had a good reputation technically, but was soon outstripped by the more widely available VHS rival.
And I can truthfully say, home video changed my life.
Mark Wheelodge has worked in the movie business for decades, and in the 70s and 80s watched this dramatic tale unfold whilst working for Video Review magazine as its technical editor. The conflict began in 1975 when Sony released the Betamax, a revolutionary home videotape recorder that cost $1,200. A year later, JVC, the Japan Victor company, would follow with its rival VHS machine, which cost just under $1,000. But it all could have been so different if JVC's parent company had their way.
Months before Betamax came out, the head of Matsushita called up Sony and said, we'd like a meeting with Akio Morita, the chairman of the board of Sony. And the guy said, we know you're working on this thing called Betamax. We want you to know now, we have already beat you. We've already got another format called VHS, which is going to have more than twice the running time, and you will never be able to compete with it. I beg of you, for the sake of the industry, please don't come out with Betamax. Join forces with us on VHS. And Akio Morita, the chairman of the board of Sony, was absolutely incensed. He was insulted, threw the guy out of his office and said, never.
The fact that VHS started with a longer running time would prove pivotal, as would manufacturing. Sony were the bigger company, but JVC signed up more people to make their machines.
Sony wanted a very high royalty price per machine and to use the word Betamax on the packaging and in the advertisements. But meanwhile, the VHS camp, JVC and Matsushita, made a much better deal with all the other manufacturers, Zenith, RCA, General Electric, and so on, and said, listen, we're going to have a cassette that's twice the playing time of Betamax, and it's going to cost you less. For the most part, I think in the beginning, and certainly by the early 80s, maybe there were 5 companies that made Betamax, and then there were 15 companies that made VHS.
To the untutored eye, the difference might seem academic. Betamax cassettes developed by Sony of Japan are smaller and drive the tape faster, which Sony claim means better pictures.
Sony relied on the fact that people wanted the best possible picture from their videos, but VHS appealed to the masses with its cost and that impressive runtime.
We always picked Betamax as having better picture quality, but the problem is Sony could never overcome the playing time limitation. If you could buy a Betamax for $9.95, the comparable VHS machine would be $6.95. It was always cheaper, and eventually that became impossible to compete with. So Sony was eaten alive by that.
But if Sony thought JVC's 2-hour tapes were troublesome, in 1977, things were about to get a lot worse.
Good job.
RCA had meetings with JVC and they said, we like this machine, but we need it to do more so that Americans can record football games. What if we cut the speed in half and made it 4 hours long instead of 2 hours long? And JVC was highly offended. They said the picture quality will be horrible if you do that. We won't allow that. JVC means something. We have an image. We can't put out a terrible machine like that. And RCA said, okay. So they went to Matsushita, Panasonic, JVC's corporate owner, and said, listen, we just talked to JVC. They won't make us a machine that will do 4 hours. Would you do it? And they said, oh, yes, we will. How many will you buy? And they said, oh, we'll buy 20,000. And they said, absolutely, you can have them by next month.
Hello, and let's start straight away with this week's chart of the top 10 most popular video rentals compiled by Gallup.
For video.
Betamax was struggling, and by 1980 VHS was outselling it by around 2 to 1. But it would get even worse. The movie rental market was exploding, and by the mid-1980s, according to the National Cable TV Association, Americans were spending $1.2 billion on renting videos.
The video rental stores were confronted with a physical reality that they only had so much space in their shops. They couldn't stock every single video format ever made. Eventually, I think it all just became too much, and they looked around and said, what can we do to simplify this and make more money and, make it easier for the consumer? And I think they said, heck with it, we're just going to go with VHS. VHS is so much simpler.
By 1982, most of the major film studios and video stores went with VHS. And as the war raged, another battle began. Universal sued Sony over Betamax, calling it a copyright threat, and tried to ban the production of all video recorders. Archive from the courts show just how concerned they were about the popularity of home taping.
I'm not suggesting to the court that an individual Betamax owner in his home is the same as a commercial pirate. But we're not talking in this case about a single individual Betamax owner. We're talking about millions of Betamax owners. And when they get done making their copies, they end up with millions of copies of respondents' copyrighted works.
In 1984, after 8 years, the Supreme Court backed Sony, protecting the entire video industry. Mark testified in the case.
The judge decided that, yes, American consumers do have the right to use a video recorder to record a television show or movie off the air. However, he specifically said, I am only going to say you have the right to time shift the recording so you can watch a show off the air once. And whether or not you keep that tape or give it to a friend, that's for another court to decide. I'm not going to decide that today.
By 1986, VHS dominated over 90% of the sales market. The war was all but over. But Sony co-founder Akio Morita said they certainly weren't losers.
But isn't it true that Betamax has been taking a declining share of the market?
Of course, as a type of the format, but still, we are one of the biggest manufacturers of video recorder, and now we are going into the next generation.
Betamax made billions and billions of dollars all over the world because they had about a 15-year run from 1975 to 1990. One Sony executive who we got to know told me, we've been in pure profit for the last 5 years. He said, we make so much money on Betamax, it's not even funny.
The final nail in the coffin came in 1988 when Sony released the SLV-70HF, its first VHS recorder. This company that invented Betamax had finally joined the format it fought so valiantly against for the past 12 years.
They finally realized this is another opportunity to make money. Betamax's failure actually became part of pop culture, and it sort of symbolized, here's what happens when you invest in a losing format. It was kind of sad to see that, and you realize, oh, everything has a limited lifespan. None of these forms of technology can go on forever.
Mark Wheelage was speaking to Johnny Ianson and remembering the home video war between VHS and Betamax. Time for us to press stop and eject as we've come to the end of this edition of the History Hour. No need to worry about setting a timer to record any of our offerings because all our programmes are available by going to bbc.com/witnesshistory. And we'll be back with another collection of first-hand stories from the past next week. Until then, this is Max Pearson from all of us here. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Imagine being here.
Scientists have made the atomic bomb. The first one was dropped on a Japanese city this morning.
Here.
During the meeting, Mr. Mandela was informed of the government's decision regarding his release.
And here.
Witnesses have spoken of a wall of water that swept coastlines in Sri Lanka, Indonesia, and Thailand.
Hear from the people who were there.
He heard me praying while he was shooting, and he just stopped. And he said, I'm not going to. I'm going to leave you here to tell the story.
Knowing that you have a spy and that you're following a spy, it doesn't get any cooler than that.
Witness History brings you first-hand accounts.
Merkel gets up and says, I'm going, and Tusk says, I'm locking the door, nobody's leaving, you're reaching a compromise, or you're not leaving this room.
Was it shopping carts that made you rich?
Well, they didn't make me poor.
Listen now. Search for Witness History wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hi, I'm Simon Jack.
I'm Zing Sing.
And Good Bad Billionaire is back for a new season.
Delving into the lives and livelihoods of more of the world's billionaires.
Like the owner of Russia's largest online retailer, Wild Berries. She's Russia's first self-made female billionaire, Tatiana Kim.
The action movie icon and former governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
And the co-founder of Snapchat, a billionaire at just 25 years old, Evan Spiegel.
Simon and I are asking you to decide if they're good, bad, or just another billionaire.
That's Good Bad Billionaire from the BBC World Service.
Listen now wherever you get your BBC podcasts.